Welcome to Real Herbalism Radio, show 283, recorded at Big Dog Studios in Eugene, Oregon. Today's show is brought to you by Ace High Graphics. We can help you get exactly the right custom designed hats, t-shirts, sweatshirts, and bags, all made to order. Ace High Graphics can help you unite your team for in-person or virtual gatherings. Get your quote at acehighgraphics.com. The Practical Herbalist. Herbalism is easy when you take a practical approach. At The Practical Herbalist, we've got loads of researched, tried and true tips and techniques to make herbs part of your daily life. Learn more at thepracticalherbalist.com. Now, here are your hosts.
I'm Candace Hunter.
I'm Patrick Hunter. And welcome to Real Herbalism Radio. I think Matthew Wood was a fun talk. I didn't know where we were going to go with that, and we haven't had a lot of live I say live, but at a coffee shop, and that's where he was. He was at a Dunn Brothers in Wisconsin, in a coffee shop, and we watched the sun, from late afternoon go down all the way to the evening where it was starting to cool off, and he was just. We didn't know that. I mean, I thought he would be more of in his office or in a place, and then most
of our guests are in an office or in their kitchen or in their living room as they're talking to us. And he's very if you ever talk to the man, he's very free flowing with things. And here we are in the middle of this interview. And, a sports car rolls up and, he's commenting about the sports car and he's going there. He said, but hey, we're in an interview, but whatever. It's a conversation.
Well, yeah, I mean, you're right. It is a conversation. That is true. And we need to have that. We not need, but we like that freedom to people be creative. But,
that's been one of the fun things we've done through the years we've had quite a few guests actually comment, especially afterwards. They walk into it, saying, okay, what are the interview questions you're going to be asking? And they're expecting it to be an interview, or they're expecting it to be an impromptu class. And I'm like, no, it's a conversation, like sitting at the kitchen table, just talking herbs. That's what it's always been about. And Matthew Wood was just like spot on with that.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
He's not kidding. Very Gemini.
He's a talker. It's okay. Fun. Sometimes when we talk to people, they get nervous because there's a microphone in front of them, or they're on Zoom or whatever, and you can just see this demeanor change. Now, before we hit record, they were fine. They were talking. We hit record, and I was like,
yeah.
I gotta pull something out, pull and pull. Not with my Matthew Wood. Yeah, it was like fun. I was trying to even get I had like a list of questions.
Yeah. As
he was going through his bio and his history and who he was, and I kept trying to get to them, and he just kept going. Like finally, when it seemed like he ran out of air, I finally was able to get one in. But no, it was great to learn about his path.
Yeah. Yeah, he's got a lot of interesting and wonderful stories to tell. I love the fact that he came from such a different sort of background, and that he saw challenges in trying to get to where he wanted to go, and he just kept persevering through them. He kept finding ways to, even he talked about he had a hard time understanding concepts like damp and dry and some of those other concepts that many of us as herbalists take kind of for granted. We really understand them. And part of why it's so easy to understand them is that we've read Matthew Wood.
Right.
Or we've read people who've read Matthew Wood and have found other words to say, but the same kinds of things he's describing. And his decision that he really wanted to find the language took him, into alchemy and into more esoteric, what were then considered esoteric elements or aspects of herbalism.
Mm-hmm. And
he found the language to understand the concepts that many of us would understand easily through those routes. And as a result, he made those concepts, the esoteric approach, as well as the chemistry and the scientifically based and the stuff that's easier for us to understand. He's kind of like found a way to marry them all into a way that his language makes a lot of sense for a wide variety of people.
Right. I mean, it's not often that we have somebody that overlaps with our history as well.
Right. Yeah.
Him being from Minnesota, him going to present moments and being part of that whole culture, that whole space,
Yep. Yeah.
And you and I come at it from coming in from the suburbs to go to our present moments. And there's this whole, him joking about how, multiple stores, were started there with weed money.
Yeah.
It was kind of really funny, and it was just kind of fun to have that connection because we don't normally have that with most people that we come on with. We don't know them.
Yeah.
Don, yes, we did. And of course, Matthew Wood, we didn't know him personally. It wasn't like we hung out. We just overlapped in a period of time that we went to a store that he happened to be at. Yeah. It wasn't there very long. Obviously he went to the Scottish school at that time. But it was just kind of a neat, it's interesting when you talk to people from where you're from, you instantly have a rapport because you have a cultural,
shared experience.
Yeah, and language that you can use and you can understand and you can see and you can you know what they're saying without them saying it in a little bit because you grew up in that environment. It'd be no different if we were from the South and we met somebody from the South and knowing from where they're at, we would have the same things to talk about as well.
Right.
Same, ideas. But he's just so eclectic, and he's so well known. It's kind of like you've done all these things and you've written all these books and you could just see that he's just even I think when he was there, his hands were wanting to do something.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. You spent the time and money on a new website. You made all the right choices or seem to, and you still do not have the website traffic you need to make your website create money for you. MudPodDesign.com can help you get the traffic to your website to have it start making money for you. Get a free SEO audit at their website, mudpoddesign.com/free-SEO-audit.
So one of the things I found interesting about talking with him was thinking about how herbalism has changed so much. Because he talked a lot about what it was like in the old days. Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of, it's like he said, now their present moment isn't the only one in Minneapolis. There's a lot of different little herb shops. Yeah. And herbalism has expanded considerably, and it's no longer the little, quaint little cute thing that can be very powerful, but most people just think of it as, play.
Alternative and hippy dippy and woo woo and all those things. Even though I don't think it was, it was never in the forefront in the public's eye, and and that is a double-edged sword, isn't it? It's in one say, I hope you're like, you want to keep it so that it isn't overrun by a lot of what do you want to call it?
Commercialism.
Okay, commercialism, and then with the advent of when he went through his learning process, his entire history, internet wasn't a thing.
Yeah.
Right. Very at the very end there, if we say before 2000, it was coming in, but it wasn't there yet. And now in the last, let's say since 2008, 2007, building a website was easy, and then suddenly Facebook was there, and then disseminating information was there, and YouTube was there, and before you know it, you've got hundreds, thousands of people that are herbalists that have a voice and have a way to say something. And now, and because of that, right, it's in the zeitgeist. People know about it. They understand it. It's in pop culture. It's referenced in movies. It's referenced in TV shows.
Yeah. On one hand, it's really brilliant that we're finally in America bringing herbalism back into the forefront. So many areas of the world never lost it, never let go. But we've been living in sort of a dark ages of health and well-being in America for quite a long time, 100 years. And it's like we're coming out of that because instead of focusing on just this one narrow bandwidth of what health can look like, we're starting to finally accept that it takes all kinds, Yeah. So that's good.
Definitely.
That's really good. But it's also, the herbal industry is going through a lot of growing pains, and it is, in all honesty, becoming harder to make a living as an herbalist now than it was way back when.
Yeah, because there's more people doing it, so that the customer base it's not diluted, but they have more choice, and with more choice, usually ends up with less of what do we call it?
The competition has become much more fierce than it once was. It used to be, like KP Kulsa said, he would show up and he would talk about one or two herbs that today we consider just common, simple stuff. But he would talk about a couple and people would flock to the store that he was talking at. And, he could make money off of relatively lightweight information as our current perspective is.
Right.
What he was doing then, he and Matthew Wood as well. I mean, they had to work a lot harder to get even that little bit of information they had. Now the information is so easy to come by, and it becomes more of like herbalism is becoming a cult of personality more than it is about just learning the herbs and using the herbs and living the lifestyle. I mean, it's partially that, but it's also about flocking to the personalities, and that's what's selling more than anything, I think, right now. So that's challenging. I mean, there's a lot of young people that want to make their living in this profession, that want to be involved in, a healing modality that is not so over-governed that it's become hard to actually heal within that structure, which is kind of what's happened in the modern medical industry. I know that the doctors that are in the industry don't necessarily not want to be healing, but because the industry has grown as it has, the structure they're trapped in really defines very tightly how they can and can't do what they do. Herbalists and many of the other alternative healers don't necessarily want that tight of a structure, but at the same time, just because this person, a person, has gone and taken 6 months worth of classes with somebody who gave them a certificate doesn't mean that they are now suddenly certified herbalists in a way that means that they really know what they're doing and they would be good teachers. It just means that they took 6 months worth of classes from whoever it was that issued the certificate. And the lack of structure means it's harder to recognize. You have to really look at the person and listen carefully. But when you haven't had any education yet, it's hard to discern who knows what they're talking about and who doesn't.
Yeah, and that comes back to a discussion we've had many years ago about certification and licensing and all of that, where, in some respect, you want that ability for the herbal consumer to be able to know what they're dealing with when they're talking to somebody that knows herbs and herbalism, that they have some kind of confidence in their ability. So that's where that licensing and certification and comes in. And, and I know the Herbalist Guild, the
American Herbalist Guild,
does something like that. I mean, at least there's something there, but there's it's not a requirement.
Right.
You can be an herbalist and a very good one without it, but how do you let the public know? I mean, how do you let these people that know that they're looking for somebody to help them with, and then they just find somebody? So there's that thing, or like we don't want to close out the ability for people to learn herbalism and be able to practice it. But on the same token, how do you know that you're getting at least somebody that has a modicum of knowledge and experience that will help you with the problem that you may be having? With doctors, we say, you got to go through med school, you got to get licensed, there's boards, there's a whole thing. And we have, quote unquote, our confidence is at least they've passed the bare minimum to get through. Right.
Right. But the problem with that too, is that they've passed the bare minimum or they've passed whatever they've passed, but it's been this specific perspective. It's a very narrow view of what medicine looks like. Like even, a doctor of naturopath gets a really different education than I forgot what they're called, osteopathic pathway in medicine. And there's a very small number of pathways you can take in medicine, even though I would bet that people who are practicing medicine would say there's a lot more ways to look at this stuff, a lot more ways to approach this. But the bandwidth has been narrowed to just these, and this is the only way you're allowed to practice medicine.
Right.
So if we do that in herbalism, does that mean that we say, anything that has to do with energetics is out, it can only be science, which means a huge swath of really good herbalists suddenly are out of a job? Well, what if we say it's only energetics then? Now the science is out. Oh, so another huge swath are completely out? That's been the challenge of the idea of certifications or boards or licensing. Mm-hmm. And because who decides what's right and what's wrong?
Yeah. And that therein becomes that double-edged sword.
Yeah.
Yeah. You want it one way, but you get it, then it doesn't really facilitate the other way. And I know that in the herbal community, that is a very contested topic. I mean, it is something that's,
It is. It's a really challenging topic. And I mean, since we can't practice medicine as herbalists, there's so many restrictions there. You have to be very careful about what you say. I mean, even Matthew Wood talking about case histories is almost a little scary, because some states and some areas would potentially look at that and start raising their eyebrows saying, are you practicing medicine? What do you mean case history? What are you talking about? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's just scary how much our language can edge into that. And you can get in trouble for that. Like, serious trouble.
Yeah, it's making, or like, making a claim that that this herb does this, and it is shown over, hundreds of years to do this thing for people. You say that, and then the FDA can come at you and say, well, you have no proof. Yeah.
Suggesting, for instance, that using arnica topically might help reduce bruising could be construed as a medical claim. And the FDA has this huge, huge document that outlines all the many things you cannot say as an herbalist or anybody else if you are not already a doctor, if you don't have whatever the permits and licensing is.
Yeah.
And it's astounding how many things you're not allowed to say, and you're not allowed to put on your products, and you're not allowed to, it's amazing how edited and how, what's the right word? How censored language must become to be safe from lawsuit.
Oh, yeah.
And lawsuit and, fines and all of that it could ruin your life, your financial life.
Yeah. I mean, I have a friend who is a doctor, and he discovered this CBN, and it was, not testing, but he was trying it out with his family, and because there's some sleep issues.
Yeah.
They all seem to be successful. They were like, oh my God, this is great. This is amazing. It's helping with anxiety. It's helping with this. It's helping that. So he's like, oh, great. I'm going to make a tincture of it, and I'm going to sell it. And I was like, okay, so what's the name? And he told me the name. And, right away I said, well, that sounds really cool. Then I told you the name, and you're like, oh, he cannot say that you cannot use that word in that name at all.
Possibly because he's technically a doctor, but
you're telling it about a product. And then another friend who knows a lot about CBD, CBN, THC and stuff, because he had a company that dealt with this kind of stuff. He said, whoa, you can't sell that.
You can't sell anywhere. That and say that, and you can't say that.
Yeah, you can't sell that anywhere in the U.S. right now, because it's a CBN, and that's not legal. And you can't. And so my doctor friend was like, whoa. It's fudge. How can I, get in on all of this? Like, well, there's a very narrow path that you can tread when it comes to making statements, using names, making claims.
Yeah.
And more importantly, the product that you're trying to sell is available or legal.
Yeah, you're playing with the FDA now. That's really
and in this case, huge. The DEA, but
and the DEA. Yeah.
So he thought this would be this really kind of little cottage little side hustle that he was going to do, and and I'm giving him all this advice on labeling and words, and my other friends giving him all this legal advice on, whoa, you can't do what you're thinking about doing.
And he's just backing away.
He's like,
because we no longer live in an area or a place where you can have the family doctor that does house calls and
right. Well, can if you want to pay for it. They do have those.
Well, yeah, those high-end concierge services.
Yes, where you pay monthly. Yes.
The whole idea of the doctor that actually just kind of knows the community, knows what herbs, what are the local herbs, and knows how to treat and help the people around him or her is not here anymore, and it's not allowed in our culture because, it's a little bit like the old abortion clinics in the 50s. You got to be careful. You don't want to get caught, because if you get caught performing an herbal action on someone,
in some cases for sure that is the case. And that community doctor, family doctor thing exists in very, very small pockets, but it's not what it once
There
was.
there are places in rural America where the communities are so small that you actually know the first name of the person who, the doctor. He might live literally next door to you, or the baker, or the pharmacist. I mean, and there's only one of them because it's just that small of a town. A lot of times those are also places where there's like one-room schoolhouses or small enough communities where there's like 5 teachers for all the kids within 100-mile radius. Well, maybe not 100-mile radius, but a large radius.
I understand. I mean, it reminds me of the movie Doc Hollywood, where he gets stranded in the South, and there's this one community doctor that's going to retire, but he knows everybody and everything. And I just remember that there's a couple scenes, and they're like, that would be great, but we just don't seem to.
I understand that may exist in some areas.
Mm-hmm.
I've never personally experienced it. I've always lived in a moderately to large-sized city. And I've never lived in a community small enough to be able to experience that. But I haven't gotten the impression from the people I've known who've lived in small communities, at least in the North, that actually really does exist. Usually it seems like the small communities, at least in the North, I don't know about the South, because I know the South, when it comes to medical care, especially when you get into like Alabama, Mississippi, that southeastern corner, like Phyllis Light said, they never gave up herbs. That was just a normal part of life.
Yeah.
The North and the West completely gave up herbs. It's not a normal part of life, or hasn't been. Now it's coming back, thankfully. But,
because of what we talked about, but yeah.
But a lot of the really small communities, like the place where you were, the Iron Range where you grew up, the small number of towns kind of all band together and create one large school district and one large hospital clinics.
And that was that's something that started in the 80s. But before then, every little community had its identity and its thing, and that's what they did. But now it's these 3 communities get together because it's easier, and these 4,
they have their reasons, but that also means that they all end up flocking to one larger hospital or clinic area.
Mm-hmm.
And therefore the doctors there aren't going to be able to know everybody because they're funneling from so far afield. They're pulling people in from so far away that how do you get to know the people?
Right.
I mean, in Doc Hollywood, the older doctor knew everybody because he lived in the town, and it was a little town, and therefore he just ran into them. He would, go grocery shopping.
He knew the families, he knew everything. I mean, there was a little bit of that, but by the time that when I was a young boy, and where I lived, we went to the clinic, and the doctors were there, and they knew everybody because it was a small town. But it wasn't the same kind of same kind of thing necessarily.
Yeah.
I know that, I lived in a small enough town where the doctor I had when I was a boy was the same doctor my mom had. It was like, and when she was younger, it was like that generational that, the doctors knew the families, just because it was, it was small towns. Here now it's
not that way.
The only way they know you is by what they read on their notes.
Yeah.
Unless you make a hell of an impression when you walk in.
Which probably isn't a good thing.
No, probably not a good thing. But so it's you come back to that whole idea of how do we do all this? Wouldn't Matthew Wood be able to do what Matthew Wood does now in the current environment than he did in the way that he did it back then?
Yeah, I can speak from my own experience as someone who started off, did a lot of, my own research and self-teaching and learning, because at the time that I was beginning, there really wasn't a lot of, you had to work harder to find teachers. They were there. I mean, Matthew Wood was teaching, Rosemary Gladstar was teaching, KP Kelso was teaching.
Sure.
But there was not internet access, and you'd have to travel to wherever they were.
Right. There was no Zoom training. There was no seminars. There was no software that did an LMS, a learning management system.
Right. That stuff wasn't there, but there were more books available. So I did a lot of that. And I am not anywhere near being able to do anything like what any of those older herbalists have done, with the same kind of resources that many of them started off with.
Right.
In fact, I had a leg up. I had slightly more resources, but the field is just so competitive. You need to You need to have a lineage at this point. I mean, being self-taught is really, really hard.
Right. Well, yeah.
And you
yeah.
need to have your lineage. You don't necessarily need to have a certificate that says, oh, I studied with this school and I graduated from their program. But you need to be able to say, I studied under this herbalist and that herbalist and the other herbalist. And they will give me references, not just I studied and I took their classes. I mean, I could say I studied under KP Kulsa because I've taken a bunch of his webinars, but he doesn't know me. So he's not going to give me a letter of recommendation just because I took some webinars from him, which I may have taken part of them as recorded versions.
Mm-hmm.
He doesn't know. There's no personal interaction. So to have a proper lineage now, you have to actually interact with the teachers to the point where they know who you are. And if you don't have stuff like that, you don't really have real creds. And if you don't have real creds, you're not marketable. It's not about what you know. It's about what you can appear to know, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and that lineage is like having a certificate in a way, assuming it's legitimate.
It's legitimate. Yeah.
And it wasn't just a weekend seminar.
Right. I mean, my own lineage is an old-fashioned one, and it's old-fashioned using the resources I had. So I would say my first teacher was Dawn, who was a student of Matthew Wood. Mm-hmm. So Matthew Wood's the top that I'm aware of the lineage. But even that is sketchy. Dawn set me on the path and got me started, and I learned a lot from her. Mm-hmm. And I learned a lot from Matthew Wood by reading his books and trying things and experimenting and creating my own program. Right. And treating it because I have a college degree. I know what colleges do. I had a really good shaman teacher. He's another part of my lineage. And he showed me how to create my own self-study. So I created my own independent study program, but it's not accredited by anyone. Right. Except me. I accredited myself. But I mean, so it's this sketchy lineage, which is exactly the same kind of sketchy lineage that Matthew Wood has. Only Matthew Wood did it at a time when a sketchy lineage makes sense. Today, it's really hard. I've, talked with and met quite a few young herbalists, and they struggle to figure out how to get their footing in the industry and make enough money to keep, the lights on. Right. And it's frustrating.
For sure. It is frustrating. Definitely. So, it was, like I say, great conversation. He was full of energy and brought up a lot of different issues. I think it's an interesting discussion on how things have changed in the herbal world in even 20 years. It's just dramatic.
Yeah, it is. And I'm thankful for the opportunity. I was thankful for the opportunity to chat with him a bit, partly because he's got such a different perspective. Mm-hmm. I mean, he didn't grow up. A lot of us grew up in fairly standard modern America. Yep. I mean, a lot of our family backgrounds are pretty similar. Some people had, herbalists in their family that taught them, and others found it through some other way, but not too many people went and lived on an Indian reservation and grew up speaking a whole nother language for the first 8 or 9 years of his life. Right. And then from there, moved elsewhere and then had like Quaker background and, all these different things, shaping the way that he thought and the way that he looks at the world. Most of us don't have those types of backgrounds. And his ability to say, hey, here's this perspective. I see this really differently, and I want to see how you see it so that I can language it in a way that we both understand. I think that's really powerful. Right. And I think that's something that we as herbalists really benefit from. That's being able to see the many perspectives.
All right. So I guess with that then, put an herb on it.
The statements made about herbs and products on this podcast have not been evaluated by the United States Food and Drug Administration, FDA, and are not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent disease. All information provided on this podcast or any affiliated websites is for informational purposes only and is not intended as a substitute for advice from your physician or other healthcare professional. You should not use the information on this podcast and its affiliated websites for a diagnosis or treatment of any health problem. Always consult with a healthcare professional before starting any new vitamins, supplements, diet, or exercise program before taking any medication, or if you have or suspect you might have a health problem. Any testimonials, questions, or case studies are based on individual results and do not constitute a guarantee that you will achieve the same results.